The year was 1986. I was a junior in high school. My guidance counselor, who I really liked, was on sabbatical that year. And so I got the other guidance counselor. He was also the football coach. He was this older man, probably, he looked like he was in his 60s as I picture him. And I remember going in his office and him asking, what do you want to be? Looking at college careers. Do you want to be a nurse? Do you want to be a teacher? And I was just a little befuddled by his silly question. This was 1986, not 1956. And he pulled out a brochure of careers. It was like a book. And I was flipping through that because I was interested in psychiatry, mental health, as well as, wow, I'm blanking on the words, working with children in school who need special education teacher. And I had some exposure with that. I volunteered with the special education class in my high school and was volunteered with the Special Olympics one year. And so I knew I had these areas of interest. And I'm looking through this manual of different careers and reading things. And then I came across a description of occupational therapy. I can't remember exactly what it said, but it talked about working with individuals with physical disabilities, mental, social disabilities, and helping to provide independence and adaptations for them. And it wasn't a very long description. And I read it. And in that moment, I said, that's what I want to do, not knowing much about it. And I remember he put some information into, I guess, like a telephone, and I printed out all these schools that had occupational therapy programs. I later realized I think this was an early fax machine, but I was just mesmerized. It just printed off all the schools. Again, this is 1986. This is pre-internet. And so we printed off different schools that had occupational therapy programs. And so began my endeavors in pursuing occupational therapy. And flash forward, I go to Elizabethtown College. I get into their program. I start in 1988, and it's a 4-year program at the time. It's a bachelor's degree. And I'm enrolled in classes. I do the clinical field works. We did ours, the big ones, over the summer, 3 months, 12 weeks at different settings. So I finished that up, the second one, after my senior year. I graduated with the class in May, but didn't complete my internship until August. At that time, the exams to become a licensed occupational therapist happened twice a year. And I had to wait until, I believe, January for the next time period to take the exam. And yet I was ready to get a job and move somewhere. And I was looking through my OT magazines, and I still remember the ad. I wish I had saved it. And it said, "Shouldn't you be in Charlotte?" And I was looking for an eclectic melting pot type of city that was medium size. And I loved the idea of warmer weather. And I actually had researched in the library in an almanac what cities have the most sunny days. And um, somewhere, I believe it was Denver, maybe Colorado, and Charlotte, North Carolina showed up on there. And I'm not sure if maybe Cincinnati, Ohio did too. So I was looking for jobs in these different areas. And I reached out to them, and the ones in North Carolina were willing to fly me down. They really had a need for occupational therapists. This is 1992. And they paid for my flights and flew me down. And so in 1992, I took my first job at Charlotte. It was called Charlotte Institute of Rehabilitation. And I had to wear a white lab coat to work, something you don't see anymore. And my first white lab coat had blue stains on the pocket because for some reason in 1992, we used carbon paper to make copies. And got my name badge on, and off I went working in Charlotte in occupational therapy. And here I am, flash forward 30 plus years later.
Hello, this is Don.
And this is Gina.
And we're with Focused Healthy Family. And today this is podcast number 113. And we're talking about none other than occupational therapy, OT, as a lot of people like to say it.
April is Occupational Therapy Month. And I thought, let's just do a podcast on what is occupational therapy? How can it help me? Where do you find occupational therapists?
And today, we're going to take a little break here, but let's talk about what we're doing right now. Uh, that's part of this. We're doing a series called Ask the OT.
We're building a community of people for support for those caring for aging loved ones. And we've been doing weekly live Q&A sessions entitled Ask the OT. And we're getting people to send messages, send questions ahead of time or via the Zoom call, via the Facebook page on Focused Healthy Family, to find out what your concerns are caring with an aging loved one, the challenges of juggling their demands, your demands. You might still have kids that you're helping to care for in some way of your own, and navigating this journey and all the different things that can be entailed as someone gets older, maybe can no longer drive, might have vision issues, might have difficulty walking or even taking care of themselves, trying to figure out where they live.
Yeah, and we're in that same situation right now ourselves. We're in what's called the sandwich generation, which is raising kids, but also taking care of an aging parent. And y- we just want to be able to help others because we know the questions and the frustrations and the challenges that are involved with that. And so in this community, it gives you an opportunity, well, to be part of Gina's Q&A sessions that she'll do twice a month. I'm going to be doing my some tapping work to help bring down the anxiety that's around that whole scenario of taking care of an aging parent. And there's just a lot of things within that community, just being around others that are going through it.
To
So we
receive information, support,
resources, all kinds.
and we'll be bringing on speakers of all different professions and people that work in different communities in different places.
We're also developing a couple of classes that we're going to be introducing through the community that help out in caring for the senior population. So if you if you know of somebody that is going through that right now, that's in that same population and has questions, send them to our website, Focused Healthy Family, and you'll see a little logo there for Ask the OT.
And you can watch previous Ask the OT sessions on our Facebook page. Is that correct, on
Yeah.
Focused
Well,
Healthy Family?
yeah, we got to, I'll put them up. Um, and we do have one more coming up on the 30th of April at 7 o'clock, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can join it free. This for That'll be the last free one. And simply go to Facebook and go to the Focus Healthy Family Facebook page, and you can join us in there live. Or if you want to be in live with Gina on our Zoom call, you can email me, don@focusedhealthyfamily.com, and I'll send you a link on how you could do that. So we hope you join us again
We
for
look
this.
forward to seeing you and joining our e-parent community, where we'll be expanding on more offers to help you out.
So we're kind of back here talking about occupational therapy. And I guess the first place, Gina, is really kind of defining it. letting people know what it is and maybe what the difference is between OT and PT, physical therapy versus
I've answered
occupation.
that question so many times.
Yeah, yeah.
So I love this quote. My occupational therapy schooling involved the history of occupational therapy, which is really very fascinating because I knew it started after World War One, but I was researching it and I found there were things that dated back even before that. But after World War One, there it started with nurses that developed into this program of helping people, particularly with in the mental health area. Um, and this quote is my favorite. Man, through the use of his hands, as they are energized by mind and will, can influence the state of his own health. So,
I think we need to modernize that with man, woman, person,
man as in human.
human, human.
So, Mary Riley, who is one of the founders of occupational therapy, she's the one who stated that quote. That quote's from her. And it really describes kind of the premise of occupational therapy that engaging in occupations, activities, how we spend our time. So, not a job, but just how we're engaged, how we're spending time can influence our own health. It can affect how we're functioning mentally, physically, emotionally, and it can influence our health. And so, this can be in a lot of different areas. Occupational therapy we have a background training in mental health. And at the time, and when I went to school, it was called psychiatry. And we took all kinds of classes related to that. We also learned about human development from birth through death and all kinds of disabilities and injuries and conditions from birth through death that can affect people. And we looked at, all the different populations. We had a focus on pediatrics one semester, and we looked at sensory integration, which has a new name now, but you could become sensory integration certified right around the time that I was in college in the early 90s. And that was an area of specialty. And so there was just all this ways that you could help facilitate someone to either regain function or with children to gain function if they were not developing in a traditional format, were not naturally developing these abilities that had some kind of, they were born spina bifida or muscular dystrophy or developed some conditions that affected their ability to function. And so how that we could help to facilitate them being able to move and utilize their skills. They even work with infants,
Well, and
premature.
I'm sorry, didn't mean,
Sorry.
you actually to get it down even into more minute or more detail is, I mean, you help people get back to how they cook or how they put their clothes on. I mean, so just to kind of define it, because it's the ADLs, is that correct?
So ADL stands for activities of daily living. So what activities do you do every day, Donald?
Well, let's see. I get dressed in the morning.
Yes.
I make my breakfast. I have to either maybe cook something. I have to get in the car and drive to work, possibly. I have to um,
Work.
work. Yep.
You have to
Uh,
be able to sit in a chair,
yep.
type on a computer, talk on a phone,
Yep.
interact with other people.
Go to the bathroom, brush my teeth, do the toiletry things, uh, take a shower, all the and and
So everything you mentioned there, from getting dressed to cooking your breakfast, driving to work, working, all those
all the
things,
details of working alone is a lot.
all those areas are encompassed by the field of occupational therapy.
Would that include social too? Like interrelating with people like at work or wherever?
It certainly can. And, pediatric occupational therapists who work in clinics with sensory integration focus, they work with kids with social skills issues and challenges. And you also find this in work settings, um, a lot of times working with people with,
Purple tunnel or something like, no, that would be physical, no? Sorry.
yes,
I'm jumping in.
in being able to work, people with mental um, low IQs. The word that's in my head is not politically correct to use. People with delays, delays that cannot, work a typical job. And so setting them up for success in the workforce. Um, People with brain injuries, all kinds of things that affect people's cognition, and that also affects, social function. And so, as part of my evaluations, I work with adults primarily. What's included on there are hobbies and activities they enjoy and occupations. So sometimes it's someone is returning to work, and what do they need to be able to do that? And so activities of daily living. I mean, have you ever done an activity that was not part of daily living?
Thinking or dreaming while I sleep. I don't know. But well, the other part of it too is talk about, because at one time I think you even defined for me as like physically things that you work on. Because PT tends, if I'm not, if I'm, well, you tell me,
Go ahead and ask
Well,
your
I mean, if I
question.
remember right, PT works kind of on more the legs and the lower part of the body. You work on a lot more of some of the upper parts of the body. Is that correct?
It often gets divided that way, and I don't like that description of occupational therapy because
Scratch.
I find it very limiting. Now, the scope and field of practice has expanded for both physical and occupational therapy, because when I first graduated, physical therapy, you would say they build up your muscle, so you have the strength, and then OT puts the hammer in your hand and helps you do coordinating to be able to do something with it. Physical therapy, gets your legs strong, and OT has you walk into the kitchen and get the items out of the cabinets to be able to cook for yourself. And so, with the evolution of documentation and reimbursement, everybody had to do functional goals. Physical therapy could no longer just set goals for muscle strength and walking this distance. It had to be looking at function, household distances, functionally what they can do. And so the lines got kind of blurry to some degree. So in some settings, occupational therapy is more focused on fine motor coordination. You see this in the school system. Can they sit? Can they hold a pencil? Can they write? Can they brush their teeth? Can they tie their shoelaces? Can they engage in these fine motor skills using your hands, that require kind of small muscle movements? And physical therapists often worked on the more gross motor activities. So what's a gross motor activity? A
Oh,
whole body movement,
oh my.
walking,
Lifting something?
walking,
Walking. Okay. Is it walking?
thinking about child development, sitting up, rolling.
Uh,
And yet both physical and occupational therapists have a lot of overlap in training in some of these different areas. And so depending on the setting you're in, it's going to look differently. Now, because we walk with our legs and because
Most
we,
of them.
this is true, and because we do fine motor skills with our hands, it's often been frequently looked at, especially in adult physical rehabilitation settings, rehab hospitals, basic hospital rehab, geriatric settings, that physical therapy is doing leg exercises, they're walking with the patient, OT is doing arm exercises, and they're helping the patient with getting dressed and brushing their teeth and their hair. Yet to do all those activities, you need more than just your arms. You need to have sitting balance. You need to have leg strength if you're going to stand up and stand at a sink. So balance is a huge area of overlap. And my favorite time working was when I worked on brain injury unit. I did this part time in my last fieldwork training and then in the job for some time. And I loved it because occupational and physical therapy worked together. And when I worked in the rehab hospital, there was an OT who specialized in vision, someone who's had a brain injury, either a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, like from a car accident. Their vision can be affected. And Physical therapy would work on their posture and getting them sitting, and then OT would see, can you use your hands? And so there was just this overlap of areas, and it was great working together with our different kind of strengths on things. Like people ask me about what assistive device should I use? Should I use a walker or a cane? And the specifics about their walking, what we call gait. And I've learned a lot over the years, yet that's not my area of expertise. And I'll usually defer that, ask a physical therapist to clarify and get their input.
Well, that's where you always say you met me. Say,
The brain injury unit.
just a joke.
I
We met at
was,
that time, though. It was that, but not, that wasn't part of the brain injury.
let's see,
No, sometimes I act like it.
I'm trying to remember when I started the job in November. I was on the stroke team first.
We
I,
met in
I can't
March.
remember if I was there for 6 months or 9, and then I went to the brain injury unit, which was where
That's why
I
we connected so well.
November, December, January, February. Yeah, it was right about that March, April that I switched. I think, if I remember correctly, it's been a long time ago. We no longer wear white coats, and
Now
do
they're
you,
all different, decorated and
do you know
colors,
why that is that we
because they don't want you to think that you're a doctor. Is that no?
it's associated, it kind of has a negative connotation wearing a white lab coat. It feels very clinical, it feels very institutionalized.
Um, sorry. Um, it feels very institute. Okay. Oh, like the old. Well, we used to when I was growing up that you had the sanitariums that were all white. Everything was white. Yeah.
My understanding is that a big reason we got away from that, and uh, I always enjoyed the pockets of the coats, but so over the years I've taken off my coat, and as I do, occupational therapy has expanded into so many areas. People often forget that it has its roots in mental health and wellness. So it started in the mental health, and after the war is when they got into more physical components of it. That's just popped into my head. I was
Well, 'cause, our youngest went through occupational therapy, which really helped in the
Had a pediatric,
socialization and
yeah,
a lot of
working on
different areas.
impulse, things like impulse control, frustration tolerance,
Mhm.
as well as sensory integration. Kids who are either overstimulated or understimulated by sensory input, their sight, their hearing, their taste, their smell. There's also a lot of overlap with occupational therapy and speech and language pathology, which involves the muscles all involved in swallowing and speaking. So they're very related, as well as cognition. So that's another big area of overlap that, um, because we use our brain to think and act, there's a lot. I had classes in neurology in college, and understanding how the brain works and fires, and when you have an injury to it, and the basics of eating and swallowing. There are occupational therapists who work more specifically in swallowing. I remember learning some about that. And yet, usually, the speech therapist, the OT, helps the person to be able to sit at the table and pick up their fork and bring the food to their mouth. And then, in a lot of settings, the speech therapist is the one who makes sure that
You
they
can
can
swallow.
properly chew the food and swallow it, that it goes down properly. And so I often have a good time in kind of adult rehab settings working with speech therapists, because we can overlap our treatment and yet we're focusing on different areas at the same time. Next
So,
question.
well, it's interesting that you're in this because you're now using these capabilities with your own with what you're going through with your dad.
Yeah.
It's nice that you're able to. Well, you also because I know within the work you do, you also do a lot of kind of teaching and helping people to not only working with the patient, but working with the family to help them to
Caregivers.
know how to how to take what you start and continue on with it.
Yeah, caregiver education is so important. I was recently talking with a pediatric occupational therapist, and if the caregivers cannot follow through with the plan, especially looking at kids with physical disabilities or um, developmental disabilities. The therapist is once a week, maybe twice, and a huge part of that is the caregiver education for the parent or caregiver to follow through on exercises and activities at home. Just like in adult and geriatric rehabilitation, we set somebody up with an exercise program, but maybe they're at the rehab, they're doing it 5 or 6 days a week, but then they go home and they might get outpatient therapy, which is typically anywhere from 1 to 3 days a week. And so if they're only doing it once a week, is that really enough to regain function, to regain strength, whatever it is they're working on? So yes, we call it caregiver education. We're educating the patient, the family, and caregivers, whatever that looks like. And that is a huge part um, of what I do. And in many settings, when you're looking at people with cognitive impairments, I remember one job I had, and my boss was a physical therapist and didn't understand why I wasn't working more on cognition and setting goals to improve cognition. So I'm working in a geriatric setting and people have dementia of different degrees. I'm not going to improve their cognition. We can try to maintain, we can try to slow, but mostly adapting. And it's
Mm,
really about educating the caregivers of the facility of ways that they can cue them, things that they can do to help facilitate their ability, environmental modifications, labeling dresser drawers. There's some great family members who do this. These are your socks, these are your underwear. So someone who's physically able to get dressed, they can locate and find things. Even just having the name labeled on their room so they know where to find it, and ways that they can approach them. I've spent a lot of time helping nursing staff, usually nursing assistants who would assist somebody with getting ready, getting dressed, whether it's the hospital, a rehab hospital, or a long-term place where they might live and they need that assistance, of not just doing it for them.
mm,
You think about our kids, if we do everything for them, they're not having the opportunity to have the hands-on skills and learning. And it's the same in my job. There's another saying about you can, about teaching a man to fish. Um,
yeah. You could you can give the man a fish or teach him to
Yeah, if
feed
you
themselves,
give the
something
man a
like that.
fish, he eats for a day, but if you teach him how to fish, he can eat for his lifetime, right? And so that's what occupational therapy is. We're teaching people the skills that they need to function. And so if I go into someone's room working at rehab setting, um, say they've broken an arm. So now their arm's in a cast and it's painful. So it's not easy to put a shirt on in that setting. And these people are typically 60 plus, and maybe they have some arthritis, and maybe they have some kyphosis where the posture is like this, and maybe they're limited with their neck already. And now they've got this shoulder that's in this cast. And how do you get your shirt on? So showing them ways to be able to adapt to do it and showing the caregivers. And sure, maybe they can't do it completely independently as long as they have that cast on, or maybe they weren't even doing it 100% by themselves before. Yet, what can they do? Do you need to put it on and help them get it over one arm? And then can they finish it? Because the more we're using our muscles, the more we're engaging in these activities, that's how we maintain. I get patients in their 90s and 100, and they raised their kids, they were home, but they were washing clothes even before washing machines, and they were hanging clothes on the line, and they were, depending on where they lived, they were walking to the grocery store. They were doing all these physical tasks all day. They were engaging in activities of daily living. This was their occupation. And this was a form of exercise. When's the last time you cleaned the house? You get a lot of exercise. You're using all your muscles in your body. You're even getting aerobic exercise at times. And so we have so many conveniences now of things that we don't have to do. And many people are in jobs where they're sitting more. So
Mm,
you become very sedentary. And if you have an injury and you have a doting family member and they want to help them. And, I've had so many male patients. I'm trying to teach them how to put their socks and shoes on. And they say, well, my wife can do that for me. Well,
yeah.
what about her health? What about her back? Or if she's going to help him, help put it on while he's laying down in the bed, not when he's sitting up in a chair and you have to bend to the floor. So, showing them easier ways to do things, but what things can they put their foot in the shoe and push down on it? Using the leg strength and their muscles to do that, using a shoehorn, maybe a long one, and then maybe they kick their foot up and you help tie it. Or it's more meaningful when we can participate in our own life. And the more engaged we are in doing things, and, I always say as a therapist, I have to put my hands in my back pockets because I want to jump in and help. And depending on the goal, maybe I've decided to help someone figure out the best way to shower and the safest way to do things. And you expend a lot of energy taking a shower, believe it or not. And my session with them is 50 minutes. And we take a lot of time getting things set up in the shower, and then they're exhausted, and my time is limited. So maybe I physically am helping them get dressed in that session if I don't, have the time. But they've more actively worked on another component of it, right? And sure, there's times when you're in a hurry and you got to get to an appointment. I've had patients say that, yeah, I usually get dressed myself. It takes me a really long time unless we have to go to the doctor, and then my spouse helps me. Um, but thinking about your sense of independence, thinking about a young child who's learning to do things, our youngest was like, me do it, me do it. Often when they're really young, before they can accurately hold a fork or spoon, they're wanting to eat, they're wanting to feed themselves, they're wanting to pick the food up. It's part of a sensory experience and being engaged in it. And so we want to facilitate that as much as possible, even if someone has some kind of physical limitation or mental limitation in any aspect. Visual. I work with a lot of people with aging population. You're seeing more people with macular degeneration because some of that comes about with aging. So people that are living longer, things like glaucoma, and there's lots of other eye diseases that affect vision. And training caregivers, using a clock method. Your meat's at 12 o'clock. Your peas are over here at 3 o'clock. Your potatoes are down at 6 o'clock. And your piece of bread is at 9 o'clock. Always I used to make placemats of where to put things because someone who's visually impaired needs things in the same location. They need to know where to find things. We've had visually impaired patients who were living in assisted living, say, they went to the hospital for whatever reason, they come to rehab. We try to set the room up similar to what they're used to doing. We'll put a bed against the wall to make a clear path to the bathroom. We want to make their environment friendly for them to move around, which is another area that occupational therapy works in, is in the area of environmental adaptations, an area we call ergonomics. And so thinking about your sitting posture, your body location as you're doing tasks like typing or whatever, work setting you're engaged in, factory work, different types of work. And so not only adapting the situation, but also an environment, adapting workplaces, adapting homes for that. We find occupational therapists in the hospital, rehab hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, both for people in long-term care and people there for short-term care, assisted livings, independent living communities. Occupational therapy works in home health care. So often geriatric, older people, but also other people who physically are housebound for whatever reason, even temporary. They can't easily get out of the house. They can't go to a therapy office. The therapist can come into their home. Early intervention centers. I mean, you find OTs in the NICU of hospitals as well as in pediatric settings prior to school age and in the school system. OTs work in the school.
So I want to take this in a little different direction. If
Sure.
I want to talk, because one of the things you've talked about before is your caregiving at work, your caregiving at home, and I want to talk a little bit about, I guess, the emotional part of this for you as a caregiver and how you kind of deal with that. Because like I say, it can be kind of a burnout place, I would imagine. So maybe we'll just talk a little bit about your feelings around it, and how you really deal with it because you're very involved as a mother and with your kids and
And
you're
dad.
Your dad, yeah. You're caregiving all over the place, and sometimes not for yourself, and just kind of anyway. Just
Yeah, I have my moments. Math was the subject I excelled in school. And I have my moments when I think, why didn't I become an accountant? I'd love to just sit in a room and look at numbers all day. And yet I like helping people, right? That's how people get into these professions. And I like helping facilitate people being able to do things themselves. And which is interesting. I chose to homeschool the kids. I saw myself as a facilitator, not their teacher. I wanted them to know how to learn, how to find information and research things, and felt that was more important than me standing over them talking to them. So it is an emotional job. It's physical, it's mental, and it's emotional. I, especially working with adults, physically, I'm helping people to stand up, to roll in bed, to go to the bathroom, which someone who can't stand without holding on, they've got to be able to get up, turn, get their clothing down, sit on the toilet, clean themselves, all these activities, right? So you see a job description for occupational therapy, and it's bending and stooping and lifting and reaching and all these different components that are involved in it. So it has a toll on your body. I also have to assess the situation. I have to use all the academic skills I learned in school to create a treatment plan and evaluate and assess what they're doing. And there's a huge emotional component. Um, Don used to work in food service sales, and he had a boss who used to tell him, "It's just ice cream, Don." And
yeah,
in my job, this was someone's life.
yeah,
I go in and see someone who was in a massive car accident and their life is altered and changed. And the time I'm spending with them, I'm trying to help them regain their life again. And working in the geriatric population, these people have lived a whole life already. And there's so much more to them than this person who's sitting and can't hold themselves up, or his arms in a sling and they're slumped over and falling asleep in their wheelchair. There's a whole lifetime of who they are behind that. And trying to find out something about them. I love finding out what people did, their profession or their children or where they've lived, as a way of connecting with them, because they're a person first. And occupational therapy is about treating the whole person, not dividing people into parts. That's why I don't like when people say OTs do arms and PTs do legs, because
yeah.
that's not my education. That is not, nowhere in my education was that spelled out like that. And because we're looking at the whole person and the whole body. And so, yeah, there is a big emotional component. And when I was in school, I wanted to work in the area of pediatrics. I really had an interest in working with kids with physical and emotional disabilities, no, mental and emotional disabilities. So kids who had been abused, kids with mental health conditions and things. And then I went into a adult rehab setting, and people coming out of the hospital, going to short-term rehab. And I just fell in love with that and really enjoyed it. And once I became a mother and had children, I was glad I wasn't working in pediatrics, because for me, that would have been more overwhelming,
Yeah.
working with kids all day long, and especially with
24/7,
especially
365.
with homeschooling children,
Yeah,
and working part-time and being home with them. And it's a different pace. It's a different working with a kid versus working with an adult. When I worked in home care, occasionally we would get a child who was receiving home health services, and usually with physical developmental disabilities. And I'd bring my kids toys and we would play on the floor, and it was kind of fun and it was very different. And yet it always felt a little out of my element because it wasn't something I was doing as often. So being able to take care of myself is essential in that. After we had the second child, um, I started, I don't know, she was probably 2 by the time I did this, but I would take time for myself on Monday nights, and I would go out and have me time. And I did a lot of writing in that time. And sometimes I just went and watched a movie, or went to a place like Panera Bread, got my dinner, and um, played a game on my phone, or just had some time where I was just alone and responsible primarily for myself. Not that that element of parent ever goes away, you know. If something happens, I several times I had to leave that Monday night and meet you at the hospital because someone fell down on their arm and we didn't know if it was broken or there was some other type of crisis that I had to leave early to attend to. And so even though this was my out time, this was my alone time,
The
I,
caregiver never.
it's still there in the back of my mind. And now our children are older and they'll still reach out to me when they have challenges. I think my son chipped a tooth. He's in his 20s. He has his own place and a full-time job, and he reached out to mom. And now I'm getting the calls from my dad, who has
Yeah.
advanced dementia with Parkinson's disease. And over the past several years, the dementia has advanced. And and I get calls from my mom because he's in a panic and he's getting angry. He's trying to leave, and just being able to listen and talk to him. And my mom's always like, I don't know what you said to him, but he calmed down. And a lot of it's just about listening.
Yeah, we've done a
Dad,
lot with that.
you're really angry. Oh, wow. You're really upset about this. And okay, you got to get out of here. Where is it you're at, Dad? You're at home and who's there with you? And trying to kind of reorient him in his environment. And so I get these phone calls and I have these dealings with throughout the day, a fun story. So we've had kids with mental health issues, and I've gotten those phone calls not only from Don, but the kids while I'm working and having to juggle that. And I was at work this past weekend, and I had taken a patient for a walk and they were sitting to rest. And I saw my daughter was calling. So I'm like, I better take this, see what's going on. And I step aside and I answer, and she's like, Mom. And I'm thinking, tragedy. Oh my God, Dawn's had another heart attack. What's going on? And she's like, two North Carolina teams won the EI award, right? She's watching the robotics competition. And she was just calling to share good news with me. And that was such an amazing, special moment because I've had so many phone calls between my dad and my kids and Don with his health that were emergency crisis challenges, right? And so it was such a joyful moment to get that call of just wanting to share the excitement with mom because like you said, it is emotionally draining. And I
Mhm.
remember saying to you over and over, my job is not just physical and mental, it's emotional. And so having that exhaustion and having that, I started doing some things on my way home from work. I used tapping or breathing and trying to like set it aside because I would still be thinking about my patients when I go home. Oh, maybe I could have done this, maybe, and having to separate from it, having to step back and having to engage in activities like gardening, I've enjoyed over the years, walking, exercising, listening to music. I love listening to loud music in my car. Ask my children who,
Yeah, yeah.
Mom, it's too loud.
I've turned that car on after she's driven it, and it's like, whoa, whoa.
And it's sort of a release. I can sing out loud. I can rock with the music, pretend I'm at a rock concert, even though I'm sitting in traffic. And finding ways to relieve stress are so important. They're important for anyone in any job. And that's kind of another area of occupational therapy, helping us learn to manage our time, our emotions, and navigate things.
And speaking of time, it's all there's I mean, I know you could talk on this for
And if you
hours and
want to
days.
learn more, you can go to the American Occupational Therapy Association website. Maybe we can just share a link to this where it talks about, this is your best source of what is occupational therapy. I Googled it, I looked it up, I saw different descriptions, but it often left out certain components of it. Occupational therapists also work in unique settings, blogging and writing and um, adaptions. And I was just reading about toy adaptions for kids with physical disabilities. So learn more about occupational therapy. Send me messages, ask me questions, join our Ask the OT. Please invite your friends, family, anyone you know who is struggling with caring for an aging loved one, or just the demands of parents getting older and maybe just worried about what's in their future as they're getting older and juggling all these things. We'd love to hear from you.
Well, and wherever you're listening to this, give us a comment. Like us on Facebook. You can find out more about us at focusedhealthyfamily.com. You can find out more about the workshops we do, the classes we have, the events that we're doing.
Depending on where you're listening to the podcast, we have our podcast, they air on YouTube, as well as audio versions wherever you can find a podcast. You can find us on Instagram. Don Speaks. There's a whole page on our website. Don goes out and speaks on different topics.
We also have our Tuesday tips. Every Tuesday we do a podcast, a short podcast with Tuesday tips, but you can also get it by email. And you can again find that on our website.
So I'm going to quote Mary Riley first. Man, through the use of his hands, as they are energized by mind and will, can influence the state of their own health. And remember, how we speak to our children, our parents, our loved ones, shapes their future and ours.